Open session, and we are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next up, comments and suggestions from the public. Did somebody grab the sign-in sheet? There's nobody here?
All right.
Okay. So seeing no one, we'll move on to action items, which is all about the yearly budget. So, and I guess for those of you watching at home, this is the focus of this meeting. Next week will be our regular business meeting where we'll have more topics to discuss.
Correct. Members of the board, Dr. Bresnahan, thank you for having me. Today is tentative to final budget, any sort of changes that may or may not have occurred. I'm happy to state that there were no changes, but we're just going to walk along with our slide presentation so that in the next month you can vote on how you feel about the budget. So if you don't mind here, again, going back to the adoption process, today we're reviewing any changes and we're having this public hearing. And then on September 11th, we would have the final budget adoption, and we'd have it then submitted by October 31st. Would be within ISB's guidelines.
I just ask a quick question on this process.
Yes, sir.
So we approve a dollar amount. Is that dollar amount? When do we approve? We're just approving how the dollar amount is getting allocated, or we're approving, yes, tax people for $100 and X million.
Oh, no, right now we're just approving any sort of changes that were with the budget. We're not doing anything with the levy just yet.
But that's my question. Like, where in this process does the levy come in?
The levy is due at the end of December, last Tuesday of December.
But what we ask for in that levy is ultimately tied to this?
It can be. Right now it is the prior year levy, which is from this past year, and then it would be, like you've said, that levy that we'll be passing in December, and then it gets blended. So you get a certain percentage of the levy from the prior year here, and then next year's levy, which would be the one that we were discussing here, that would be then applied as well. Okay. But so it's split up into two different years.
Gotcha. So the 130 whatever, I think it's 36 million. That is based on the levy from last year, combined with what we anticipate the levy to be for the second half of this year, or just the levy last year?
No, potentially for next year as well.
Next year, assuming an increase, or next year, assuming it stays the same?
Assuming an increase.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. So that right now, it's just, and to the comment here, the budget is merely a roadmap, right? It's not necessarily something where it's, oh, wow, now we got to, like, this has to be held to it. So if there are emergencies or if revenues don't come in the way that we've expected them to be, or maybe there are anything with expenses, maybe we hire, maybe not, whatever, that is not always reflected in this original budget because it's something we can only see for so far. Now, if things were to change, then, we look at the budget, but it's just a roadmap, essentially, is what it is. I don't know if that helps at all.
As we go, if there's an area in the slide where you can demonstrate how that specific spend or expense would be adjusted, maybe that'll probably illustrate it a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So, okay, so let's go to the next slide then. The areas of focus are what we still look at, especially when talking about the budget, working with our SLT, working with administration and staff to make sure that we receive our revenues to ensure that these 8 areas of focus are hit on. And our highlights, what we're looking for, the equitable resources for all children, any sort of facility safety and security upgrades, curricular updates, and then the resource allocation plan that was passed. So from what we presented before, there is no change. One thing that we did keep in mind was that the operations and maintenance fund, there were projects that were being rolled over still that aren't finished yet, or in terms of billing. So we aren't sure when the billing comes in, working with the auditors to make sure that we capture those dollar amounts in the proper fiscal year, whether it be 23 or 24.
Mhm.
And that's the same thing with the capital projects fund. So example, the continuation of the 10-year plan. We discussed at finance facilities actually today about
Mhm.
what is it that's next on the plan, what playgrounds, what
Mhm.
potential with windows, anything that has to do with building upkeep. And that's an example of when we look at how much we're looking for revenues and budgeting and expenses, it comes to that. Another thing was project rollover. The window project was it was something that we still are receiving a couple of billings on just because we're finalizing it, and we don't pay the vendor until the punch list is complete in full. So that's kind of one of those moments where we get to figure out what fiscal year it's going to come out of.
So when something like that happens, it looks like we came in under budget the prior year, and then it gets built into this budget.
Not
Is that-
always.
okay.
It depends on when you receive the billing and when everything is substantially completed.
Ron, for the folks at home, can you give us an example of a project that would fall under the operations and maintenance fund and a project that would be a capital project, just so they.
Absolutely. So operations and maintenance fund are more of a day-to-day pieces. Like, so if we're looking at any sort of quick repairs, whatever with the buildings, capital projects is more of a big project cost. So you're looking at the windows, anything with
The
the
roofs.
architects that's readily available. We can even do health, life, safety under capital projects. So that's the big fund that in the last 3-4 years I've been here, we've pretty much taken those big projects and we've put it into that.
Mhm.
So when you see the big pieces that are happening inside our schools and outside of our schools, that's where that comes from. O&M, which is operations and maintenance, is just, it's more of the routine, the smaller projects that you don't really see. Yes, Mardell.
The only thing that with my personality when I read it concerning your job is we spent a lot of money on furniture last year. I don't remember ever seeing all these big amounts of furniture in the past, and yet none of that has ever come.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Sorry about that. That has never come to the board to be discussed before we've done it. I would like in the future, if we're going to spend all this money for furniture, and it said it's for classrooms or it's for school use. Well, where is it? I would like that to come to the board for discussion or clarification, if nothing else, in the future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Definitely. Not a problem.
Okay.
So these are just the operating funds. If you see here, the ed fund, for example, is $106.7 million in revenues, but we're also anticipating expenses of $103.8 million. That is a difference of $2.8 million. And that in itself, our ed fund is pretty, it's large. If we're looking at a lot of the curricular changes that have occurred over time, I mean, there's a lot of implementations going on right now. They cost money. Operations and maintenance, it essentially came about with the flow of inflation. So when you look at O&M over time, we were just under that 10 million at one point last year, and now we're seeing it as about 10.9 for revenues and the expenses being about 10.4. Transportation continued to be a burden for the last couple of years ever since of COVID. That's an example of where we were fortunate to have money set aside so that we could, as the district, use local funding to catch up for that instead of just relying on the state for its for what they're supposed to be giving us in terms of any sort of reimbursement. Problem is that there wasn't as much to reimburse because, I mean, we've all seen the transportation problems that we've had in the past couple of years, with drivers and whatnot. So we didn't have as many routes to run. Since we didn't have as many routes to run, we didn't spend as much. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but that's what the story is.
Looking at this as like a lay person, not familiar with how these budgets work and such. So I see the difference, 872. So that's positive. That's in the black, right? 872, 190. What would be like, what's the risk there? What's the catastrophic event that all of a sudden would dry that well of cash? Because even during COVID, I think it was like an extra like 3 million, I think, that we spent on like COVID costs or something like that. But what keeps you up at night in the sense of this could happen, taking all that money out?
Okay, what keeps me up? Okay, let's think about this one. I'll give you a good example. When we have discussions, when it comes to facilities, windows, safety, security, curriculum, additional staffing, additions, that all comes at cost. Right now, we currently have about $100 million in our fund balance, a little bit more. If we were to do everything that people wanted us to do, we would not have that money, I guarantee it. For example, there was discussions in the past with, hey, let's just add another gymnasium to the buildings. That was at a cost of approximately $10 to $12 million per school. And that was it 2023 money? Inflation has really caught up with a lot of that. Staffing, that again, you're adding, I mean, if you're looking at a single PPO option for somebody, it's about $9,000-$10,000, and then you have to include their salaries as well. Windows, I mean, we've spent millions of dollars on windows, but we've had the money. Again, that was another example. The security and safety, when we first purchased the cameras, that was about $680,000, give or take, just to get those up to speed. And that wasn't including adding on additional cameras. Roofing, we've spent over 25 million. There's, I mean, and the list can go on. Not only that, though, the county has been delinquent on its payments last year, and now they said for this year as well. That's not our fault. That's our problem, though. So when you add up the list of what people want, and you don't want to take out a bond, you don't want to raise taxes, you don't want to raise revenues in certain regards, yet increase the items that you want to purchase, you're looking at trouble. That's not to say that that's going to happen, because I believe in our administrative team and the board, and making sure that we do pick the right pieces, and that we do prioritize. What do we say, right? But if there is no priority and it's just a yes to everything, this district will go down fast. And that's any district.
Okay.
Just want to add to that. I think it's a quote from one of the papers that I gave you tonight, but one of the conventions that I was at was a wonderful speaker, and he made a big point of consider your needs, not your wants, because you can't have everything you want, but you can work to have everything that you need. And I think we should consider that pretty much all the time.
Yeah, it's much appreciated. And that's where the 10-year facility plan that we started off with was really important, because it kind of kept things back into focus. And when we look at things and say, it's easy for someone to say, this is the newest, coolest thing in the building, let's get it. Well, it's not in the plan. You know, we're looking for curricular expansion, right? I mean, that honestly, that's important. It should not have someone else where someone says, you know what, this cool gadget's going to make us jump and make things better. It's not that way. There has to be a prioritization of certain items. And that's where I think we need to just continue on with. The district is fortunate that we do have the tech parks. We do have a strong tax base. But that's what carries it. And we have the lowest tax base in the area, but nothing's getting cheaper.
Okay.
In fact, you know, when I first got here, I'm going to have to look, but I believe the revenues and expenses just alone for all of the funds were about this. And now this is just 3 funds, dollar amount.
So when we've built in this budget, we've built in the maintenance plan for the 10-year facilities, but we're having the architects go out and study our junior highs in Brentwood, and there may come some expenses out of that for capital improvements or adjustment. Would that go into this budget? Is there funds already in there? How does that work?
Well, then that's going to that's when we'd have to have a discussion
Okay.
in
that-
finance facilities.
That would be a case where we would be using something above our, how do I want to say this? Something out of the capital fund, right?
Correct.
Which is what the point of it is, right? We've been building it up over time to prepare for such a situation.
Yeah, one of the pieces of joy that I've had in being here is, as a team, we've worked together to implement a lot of, especially with the capital fund, we've built it up so that there are no bonds or pay like that we have to do. That to me, that's it's unacceptable if we're able to raise those funds and have the money. However, if you do the additions, you do add on, you're going to dip in, and your 60 fund is going to go away. That 60 fund right now is taking care of 15 buildings at their basic needs, and not many districts can do that. We've done a great job as a group, just kind of working through that, and that's why we still have to continue to be on the path of being thoughtful.
Right. So these operating funds are balanced year by year, but that's sort of where we've been stockpiling money for bigger projects.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and so actually, while we're here, so Mr. Johnson made a good point. So we talk about the levy, right? So let's just say hypothetically, we say it's nothing, right? It's $0 for the levy. Like we don't increase it at all. That would be in the ed fund. It would be we could find a way to make anything break even, but I don't know how long that would last for. I can get together those informational numbers. So we see if you were to say 0% for down then, because again, this is just hypothetically for what we're normally anticipating, if that makes sense. And then when that decision comes with levy, that's when we can discuss how do we want to levy and what we're planning on. But yeah, that would then take away from the ed fund. You could take away from the O&M fund, transportation fund. In terms of initial dollars, you'd have to go more into your savings. We do have good savings, and I mean that's for sure. But I just like to make sure that we all plan it right.
In looking over the numbers, it makes me feel good to see that the numbers under the revenue column are definitely bigger than the numbers on the expense column, except that the one in transportation is the only problem. Are there any things that we can do? Because I know bus problems are, very difficult, but I hate to see the expenses more than the revenue.
No, that's a good question. So we're anticipating receiving more of our funding with the fact that we have utilized our transportation more so this year. And so then we should be able to recoup more of our funds next year than in prior years. So that will even out, and that'll help us out then too. But my fear always is that the state likes to prorate and say, well, it's like paying your mortgage. I owe you $1,000, but I'm only going to give you $800, and we're calling it even. The state tends to do that with these types of like transportation being that's a categorical fund. Special ed is a categorical fund. They do that too as well, and it's disheartening, which makes me wonder sometimes how the state is going to continue to stay afloat. And that's why we're lucky we have a great tax base, and we have to continue to take care of ourselves.
Does that transportation fund, the revenue for the transportation fund, is that 100% like, let me see how to put it. Does the state or federal government fund that revenue fund, or is that also coming from the property taxes of the taxpayers in the district?
That also comes from the district. Yeah, they only fund about, I forgot how much it was. I think it was in the 80s percentage wise. Yeah.
That's a good example in that category around needs and wants, Mardell. When we think about what is it that we are required to provide in terms of transportation, but we have a significant amount of choice programs as well that we do provide and prioritize transportation for. So that is included in that number as well.
is correct.
Let me ask a silly question. In the business world, it's like, all right, we got to get our revenues up. Let's do A, B, C to generate more business, et cetera. We don't do that here in the school district world. But is there anything that can, other than applying for grants or something like that, to actually get revenues up?
Yeah, I mean,
Or I guess taxing the people more, I guess.
the grants, I mean, there are some grants out there. Some of the grants, though, are against us in the respect that they expect our districts of our magnitude to fend for ourselves because of our tax base.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's one example. There are other creative ways, but you've got to be really careful. Like, for example, with our investments, there are only so many investments we can even do. So like when you go home and you mess with your Fidelity account, like I do, it's easy to say, I'm going to invest in this right now, you know, but in the public sector, because it's public tax dollars, you can't just do that.
Sure.
It is really about controlling expenses
Yeah.
and living within your means in terms of revenues.
Sure.
But in this case, the negative 2.4 million, 2.46, that's the worst case scenario. That number can actually get better, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe is there any context you can add to what we predicted last year versus what we ended up coming in at? Because it was lower than what but then next year, you know, the bottom line with the funds that aren't in here, it looks like we're coming in
That's good.
over budget. So
Exactly. So with the expenses, this is assuming we're getting all of our routes taken care of this year. So you're right. It is like the worst case scenario. Exactly. Now, if that doesn't happen, that dollar amount is going to decrease, or maybe we don't utilize as many routes. Maybe there aren't as many trips. I'm trying to think of it in that regard. Yeah, then we'll see a reduction. But when we're looking in the future, next year we're getting that dollar amount based on what happened this year. So you're right. That money from then will be applied for this year, next year, and then this won't be that way. It's just trying to catch up with this whole COVID piece and the drivers.
And I want to be careful when you say it's the worst case. We're actually supplying buses for every single route we want this to happen.
Yes.
So it's
Yes,
worst
yes.
case, but we
In the
still
best
want it
way.
to happen.
Yes.
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 I would not quantify it as worst case. I would say this is sort of the nominal.
most
Absolutely.
Yes.
I understood. Yeah, I know. I get exactly. And yeah, we want the routes. Absolutely. But again, that's what would happen.
Our new transportation provider, Safeway,
Correct.
right? Do you know offhand if we were looking at our previous transportation provider, would that 2.4 be 3.1? Would it be even larger as far as
It'd be larger.
The delta?
Safeway, though, they I believe they already have over 70 drivers, which is more than what our previous bus companies have had. They were in force at the back to school events, which was really nice to see them, just kind of interact. They're very invested, and they're still continuing to recruit drivers. So I fully expect that difference to be that way. At least they better. And then the ed fund too. That's assuming everything goes according to plan. So you're right. It's like what TR said, this is the assumptions of everything's going picture perfect. I mean, for all we know, because transportation, when COVID hit, that built that fund balance a bit more. And so that's why we can sustain this. Where if, like, for example, for transportation, if we were to not see a penny for the entire year, we could do it. But that means it's all gone out of that fund.
And the ed fund, is that purely salary and benefits?
No, that would be, so you have salaries for staff, you have benefits, you have curricular resources, new curriculum, you'll have any sort of supplies, materials,
anything
programming.
within the four corners of the classroom, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of programming. It's a huge, that's what we want to focus on.
Okay.
And then the next thing we have to do is do a resolution.
Is there?
Correct on
Is that the
budget
last slide?
change, or you- recommendations?
I just do want to reiterate, though, this is just a map. There are the revenue sources we can definitely, we're going to have to address and look at anyways. And, that I'm prepared to do. That'll be a good lift.
What are we voting on a motion for this now?
Yeah, so this is the resolution for changes to the tentative budget, but there have been no changes, which is what
No,
we're
there are no changes.
informed of. So
I'll make the motion. Be it resolved that on the 7th day of August 2023, the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 59 approves that there were no changes. Let the minutes reflect the following as set forth in this motion.
all right, and we need a vote. Oh, we need a second.
Second.
Hold on. We need a second. Thank you.
I'll second it.
You'll second. Okay, good. Then we need a vote.
Okay. Zach.
Aye.
Espino, aye. Johnson.
Aye.
Mancia.
Aye.
Sager.
Aye.
Schumacher.
Aye.
And Chesney.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes.
Alrighty.
All right. And then the last step of this process tonight is we have to have a public hearing. So
There's nobody.
we still have to open the public
Mhm.
hearing, say
Mhm.
that there's nobody here, and then close the public hearing.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'll make the resolution to open it. So I'm going to make the motion at 7:27 that the Community Consolidated School District 59 Board of Education meeting be opened on this date, August 7th, 2023, for a public hearing on the proposed budget for the 23-24 school year. And the secretary shall record the time as 7:27. And then we need a
Mhm.
second.
I'll second it.
Okay. And then we need a roll call to open the meeting or to open the hearing.
Espino, aye. Johnson.
Aye.
Mancia.
Aye.
Sager.
All right.
Schumacher.
Aye.
Chesney.
Aye.
And Zach.
Aye.
Okay. So the meeting is currently open. Let's just give the clock a moment
Before we
to
disband
roll
it,
over.
could I just make a comment?
Sure.
The papers that I passed out to the superintendent and all the board members earlier are copies of heritage papers that I have saved over the last 50 years. Obviously, you don't have to keep them like I did, but I'm trying to get rid of a lot of this kind of stuff in my house. So if you want to look at them and read them, fine. If you just want to look them over, fine. Don't throw them out, however. I don't need them back, but when we have people in the audience, and we don't have anybody tonight, but to speak of, we can give it to them because the audience, I'm sure there'll be people in the audience who would like to read some of what went on in the past.
Perfect.
But I hope you find some things in there that are interesting.
Okay. So let's finish this budget hearing. So
Anybody here to
there's
speak?
nobody here to speak. We need a motion. Yes, Janet. Resolution 2. So I need somebody to do that one, or I can do it again. So I'll make a motion that the hearing on the 23-24 proposed budget be closed, and the secretary shall record the time as 7:29 p.m.
Second.
Second by,
What was that?
and then we need a roll
Adjournment
call.
again?
Johnson.
Budget meeting.
Aye.
Okay.
Mancia.
Aye.
Sager.
I've been
Aye.
to a convention
Schumacher?
where I talk about-
Chesney.
Aye.
Zach.
Aye.
Espino, aye. Motion passes.
And then we need a motion to adjourn. Well,
Big fan of fast meetings.
What time do I put on it?
throw
I
7.
will move to adjourn for the night.
I'll second.
All right. 7:29. Roll call, please.
Okay, Mancia.
Aye.
Sager.
All right.
Schumacher.
Aye.
Chesney.